So this is what I believe is the interpretation, at least um, what would be worthy of destroying a whole city and only saving Lot from it with his two daughters and his wife that even did not survive because she turned back and she was turned into ash.
Now, consider the sixth impossibility, which is perhaps the most visually iconic moment in the entire story, and also among the most morally indefensible. As Lot and his family flee, his wife turns and looks back at the burning cities. Instantly, without warning, without process, she is transformed into a pillar of salt. This image has penetrated culture so deeply that it functions as a universal metaphor. Do not look back. Do not cling to the past. Do not question the direction God has set for you. The punishment for a single backward glance has been invoked in sermons, in literature, in art, in personal conversations about grief and nostalgia and the danger of second-guessing divine instruction for more than 2 millennia. But read the text with the same careful attention you would give any document that was being used to justify a serious claim. The angels deliver their warning in verse 17. Escape for your life. Do not look behind you. The Hebrew grammar of this command is directed specifically at Lot. It is addressed to him individually, in the singular masculine form. There is no recorded moment in the text where anyone warns Lot's wife. No angel speaks to her directly. No passage describes Lot relaying the instruction to his wife before they began running. She appears in the narrative. She walks alongside her family through the destruction. And then she glances back, perhaps at the city where she had lived her entire adult life, where her married daughter's husbands had just died, where everything she had built and known and loved was burning, and she is instantaneously converted into a mineral compound, with no appeal, no explanation, no mercy. The physical evidence for this event has been sought by pilgrims, historians, and travelers since antiquity. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, claimed to have seen the pillar himself. Roman-era travelers described it. Medieval pilgrims reported it. But every single account pointed to a different formation, different locations, different shapes, different sizes. No two accounts in agreement about where exactly Lot's wife could be found. Because the Dead Sea region is saturated with natural salt formations, wind erosion and the extraordinary mineral density of the area produce pillars and columns of salt that dot the landscape in great numbers, visible to any traveler who passes through. Ancient people who already knew the story of Lot's wife would look at those natural formations and see confirmation. They would point to whichever pillar seemed most compelling and say, "There she is." The story explained the geology, and the geology seemed to confirm the story. That circularity is not evidence. It is mythology doing exactly what mythology has always done. That is impossibility number 6. After everything that has already happened, the negotiation, the mob, the offer of daughters, the destruction, the transformation of a woman into salt, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah still has one final impossibility to deliver. It is the darkest one. It is the one that strips away any remaining pretense that this narrative is operating as divine history or moral instruction and reveals, with almost uncomfortable directness, the purely political machinery running beneath the surface of the text. By the time you see it clearly, the entire story looks different, not like scripture, but like a weapon, carefully constructed and deliberately aimed. Lot and his 2 daughters have fled Zoar and taken shelter in a cave in the mountains. The text explains that Lot was afraid to remain in Zoar, which is worth pausing on for a moment because the mountains were exactly where the angels originally told him to go, and Zoar was the alternative he requested and received as a personal favor. Now he has abandoned the divinely granted refuge and gone to the place he was told to flee toward in the first place. The text treats this minor reversal as unremarkable, but the cave is where the 7th and final impossibility unfolds. And it begins with a claim so logically indefensible that it is almost disorienting to encounter it in a text treated as sacred. Lot's daughters look around at their situation and arrive at a conclusion. They believe there is no man left on earth. Not in the surrounding region. Not in any neighboring territory. Not anywhere on the planet. Their precise words in verse 31 are, "There is no man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Therefore they will make their father drunk and sleep with him to preserve the family line." This is the reasoning the text presents. And if you read it without the reverent deference that religious conditioning installs in readers, the logical problem is immediate and enormous. These women came directly from Zoar. They left a living, populated town, a town full of people, full of men. A town so intact that Lot himself had been afraid to stay there. That town did not cease to exist when they walked away from it. Zoar was spared specifically so that Lot could survive there. And yet the daughters behave as though humanity itself has been extinguished, and they are the last women on earth, with incest as their only biological option. This does not reflect confused thinking on the part of the characters. This reflects the author's requirement. The story needs Lot to father children who will become the ancestors of specific enemy nations, and it needs to accomplish that without implicating Lot in conscious moral failure, because Lot must remain righteous, because the narrative has already invested in his righteousness as the justification for his survival. So the text constructs an explanation that attempts to absolve him entirely. He was drunk. He had no awareness. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Verse 33 and verse 35 repeat this claim identically for both nights. He perceived nothing. He was completely unconscious. He had no knowledge of what occurred. He is biologically present, but morally absent. The author wants the outcome without assigning Lot the responsibility. But the biological claim the text requires is itself an impossibility. The narrative insists that Lot was intoxicated to the point of complete unconsciousness, no awareness, no memory, no perception of events on two separate nights, with two separate people. Yet on both nights, he was physically functional enough to successfully impregnate a woman. Anyone with basic knowledge of how alcohol affects human physiology understands the contradiction embedded in this claim. The level of intoxication that produces genuine unconsciousness and complete memory loss is incompatible with the level of physical function the story requires. The text cannot have both conditions simultaneously operating in the same body on the same night. It wants Lot innocent, and it wants him fertile. And it has written a scene in which those two requirements are biologically irreconcilable. Both daughters give birth to sons. The older names hers Moab, from the Hebrew phrase meaning from my father, and he becomes the patriarch of the Moabite nation. The younger names hers Ben-Ami, meaning son of my people, and he becomes the patriarch of the Ammonites. These were not abstract ancient peoples. The Moabites and Ammonites were nations with whom Israel maintained generations of conflict, tension, and intermittent warfare across long stretches of biblical history. They were real neighbors, real rivals, real political and military pressures on the Israelite kingdoms across centuries. And this text gave them an origin story that branded them permanently as the products of drunken incest. Born in a cave from a violated father, by daughters who engineered their own conception, every Moabite and every Ammonite, by the logic of this narrative, carried that contamination in their bloodline from the very beginning. This is ancient political warfare conducted through narrative. It is not unique to Israel, as noted earlier. Virtually every major ancient culture weaponized origin mythology against its enemies in exactly this way. But recognizing that the practice was common does not make it less deliberate or less revealing. It shows us what this section of the text was actually built to accomplish. It was not preserving history. It was not transmitting divine wisdom. It was constructing a story that made Israel's enemies appear morally degraded at the level of their very origin, less than contaminated. The children of sin, rather than the children of legitimate lineage. Sacred narrative deployed as ethnic slander. This is what Baruch Spinoza saw when he read the text in the 17th century. This is what cost him his family, his community, his standing, and ultimately, his health and his life. He saw human fingerprints everywhere in the contradictions, in the propaganda, in the political machinery embedded beneath the theological surface. He saw that the story was not what institutions claimed it was, and he said so clearly. In writing, under his own name. The punishment was swift and total. He was 23 years old when they cast him out, and he spent the remaining 21 years of his life in isolation, grinding lenses in small rooms, thinking without interruption, writing without the comfort of community or the warmth of belonging. He died free. That distinction matters more than it might initially appear. He died having refused to protect himself through dishonesty. He died having looked at something clearly and said what he saw, even when every institution surrounding him demanded silence. He died knowing the truth of what these texts contained. And he trusted that someday, people with the courage to look honestly would find his analysis and recognize what he recognized. That the fear embedded in these stories was constructed, that it was installed deliberately, and that it loses its power the moment you see how the machinery works. You were 7 years old when they gave you this story. You were too young to evaluate it, too small to recognize the contradictions, too trusting to question the authority of the adults who presented it as divine truth. That was not an accident. Fear installed in childhood runs deep, precisely because it arrives before the critical faculties that might examine and reject it have developed. But you are not 7 years old anymore. You have just examined 7 impossibilities, 7 clear points at which this narrative collapses under honest scrutiny. The fear does not belong to you. It was placed in you by people who understood that a frightened person is an obedient person. Questioning does not make you wicked. Doubting does not make you deserving of fire and brimstone. Looking clearly at what is actually written, and refusing to pretend it says something different, that is not rebellion. That is the most fundamental act of intellectual honesty available to a human being. Spinoza knew that. He paid everything to say it. And now, finally, so do you.
You see the little dog here? He's got huge ears. Did you notice that? The dog here? Huge ears. Almost as big as the head. And yet, dull of hearing. And their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and should understand with their heart and should be converted and I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes for they see and your ears for they hear. For verily I say unto you that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which ye see. You see? And have not seen them and to hear those things which ye hear and have not heard them. So that was to me the apologetic cat bringing that scripture. And I'm completing it by giving the interpretation overall of both the intention of God and also the intention from the satanic people who are trying to put doubts in the validity of his words. Freemasons are using code to communicate within themselves only. Freemasons do utilize specific signs, scripts, and shake and phrase to recognize one another, which are traditionally shared only among members. Isn't it the same exact thing that has been accused by them who made the video against the Word of God? And you mirror this on your YouTube channel. Is it just because you really did not understand it, or it was because it was part of the propaganda from the spirit that is within you?